everybody, Pastor Rebekah here. You may have heard that Emmanuel now has a podcast called the Good Word Podcast. And I've heard from some of you that you would like to know more about what a podcast is. So I thought I'd share a little bit about that, why we chose to have a podcast here at Emmanuel, and where you can find it, how you can listen to it. So the first part, what is a podcast? I like to describe a podcast as like a radio show. So it's not a radio station where you would hear people talking, you would hear music, you would hear advertisements all in one place. It's more like one radio show. So for example, if you listen to Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR, you could find that as a podcast. It's just that individual show. So what we have here at Emmanuel is a podcast where we have what we have here at Emmanuel is a podcast where we share the sermons and the scripture from each week in this podcast form. So it's a place where you can hear those things rather than see them in the live stream as part of a whole service. So, like I said, you can find all kinds of different podcasts, different shows, and we have one too. So it's a cool, different way to hear the message, the gospel that we preach here at Emmanuel, to hear the Lutheran perspective on the gospel in another format, a podcast form. So the next part, why did we choose to have one? Well, it's just that. We were looking for a way to meet people in their everyday lives. Something that you could listen to on the way to work or on a dog walk or after dropping your kids off at school. Something you can listen to while you do the dishes or clean up around the house. It's really accessible. So our live stream is awesome because you can see a whole service and see it online. But if you're looking to just hear one piece, to hear the gospel and the sermon, this podcast is a perfect thing for you. So you can find this podcast on many different listening platforms. One of them is Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Those are two really common places to find a podcast. And so I'll actually show you what it looks like to find our podcast. And I'll use Spotify as an example. That's where I get podcasts. And it's just an easy spot to find our podcast. But you can also use the same way of finding it on places like Apple Podcasts too. All right, so here you see my home screen of my iPhone. And many people get their podcasts on their smartphones. You can also find this online, and there's actually a link to our podcast right on the website. So if that's how you're wanting to find our podcast, on a computer or some other device like that, the easiest thing to do would probably be to just go through our website. But I'll show you how to find it on a mobile device. So here in the lower section of my screen, you'll see the Spotify app. It's a green circle in a black box. So I'm going to click on that, and it opens up this Spotify app. And from the search function, you can search the Good Word podcast. Just click search. So when you do that, you'll find several things called the Good Word Podcast, but what you want to look for is our logo. So in the top search hit here, it says the Good Word Podcast and Emmanuel Lutheran Church with our logo in that on the left side of the screen. So once you click that, now you've found our podcast, the Good Word Podcast. So here you'll find all of our episodes. Right now we just have one from this past week, so you can listen to that, or you can listen to the trailer that's right above it, which is just a short introduction to what our podcast will be. So that's how you find it on a mobile app. It's fairly similar on Apple Podcasts as well. And as always, if you have questions about what a podcast is, why we have one, or how to get to it, please let me know. I'm happy to share. I know it's a new platform for many folks. Not everybody listens to podcasts regularly. And so I'm happy to share more about that if you have questions.